I went on a skiing expedition to the South Pole with 4 friends and an experienced guide. Things didn't exactly go to plan. If you're confused, you should start at the beginning. Lena sat down in the snow, her breath coming in panicked gasps. David and Jake stood paralyzed, staring at Katie's frozen form. I grabbed our guide by the shoulders, turning him to face me. "What the fuck, Leif?" I shouted. "How did this happen? What the hell is going on?" Leif looked at me. His face was like carven rock, but I could see a gleam of fear in his eyes. "I don't know," he replied, almost whispering. "But we must return. We have to get out of here." "What? And leave Katie behind?" said David incredulously. "You can't be serious. There is nothing we can do for her. She is dead. We have no pickaxes to dig her out. And even if we did, what would we do then?" Leif was somehow remaining calm. "We need to return. Whatever is happening out here, we must escape it. We must go back to Hercules Inlet." "What is happening here?" yelled Jake, his anger flaring up. "Who? What did that to Katie?" Leif looked at him. "I don't know," he said finally. "I am as scared as you, Jake. But if we wish to survive, you have to listen to me. We have to turn back, now." A shocked silence fell on our group. Slowly, we picked ourselves up and headed back to camp. David stayed the longest, looking down at Katie's frozen form through the ice. I put my arm around him and led him away. As we packed up and prepared to leave, my eyes kept returning to that damning stone circle. It seemed even closer than before, mocking us, threatening us. We set out in mournful silence. The weather, fair for the last 3 days, was taking a turn for the worse. Snow and wind began gaining in strength. Finally, Leif stopped the group. "We must set up camp before the conditions worsen," he announced. We set about the task. As we worked, Leif continued talking. "We have to maintain a watch in the night. I will begin, and after an hour and a half, I will wake up Jake, and so on. This way, we will not be vulnerable while the others sleep." "What are we guarding against?" said David, his voice low. "I thought this place was abandoned. Antarctica has never been truly settled." "No," Leif replied, "only scientists. And tourists come here, I believe, during World War II. The Germans briefly established a base on the coast, but that is all." I couldn't help but notice he had cleverly evaded David's question. We erected our tents in dejected silence, everyone occupied with their own morbid imaginations and fears. As I settled into rest, I could hear Leif's footsteps outside the tent as he paced back and forth, keeping watch. My guard duty was not up for another 3 hours. I lay, thinking about Katie, forever where we had found her, frozen in the ground. I couldn't get her face out of my mind. At least she had died in her sleep. Eventually, I fell into a slumber from pure exhaustion. I woke some time later. I could tell it had been far longer than 3 hours. I was feeling far too rested for it to have been such a short time. Climbing out of the tent, I saw Leif. He was sitting in the center of the camp with his back to me and his hood up. "Leif, everything all right?" I said. No answer. My heart began beating harder. "Leif," I called out again, praying for an answer. He remained silent. Slowly, I walked over to his sitting form. He didn't move an inch. I put a hand on his shoulder and turned him around. The others ran out of their tents as my scream tore them from their slumber. They found me, standing above what I had thought was our guide, except it wasn't. It was Leif's clothes, filled with snow and shaped into the outline of a man. From the hood, a smooth globe of packed snow and ice stared outwards. "Shit, shit, shit, oh fuck, oh," shouted Lena, turning away from the figure. David was staring at it, completely motionless. It was Jake who woke us from our horrified trance. "Guys, look." We stared at where he was pointing. Of course, a stone circle, this time to the east. David ran to the edge of the camp and screamed towards it. "What do you want?" he yelled. "What do you want from us?" I rushed over to him, Lena behind me. We put our hands around him and gently led him back to the camp. "We have to keep moving," Jake said firmly, assuming command through force of will. "Hercules Inlet is only 2 days away. We can't stay here." "What difference does it make?" mumbled David. "We have to keep moving," repeated Jake, his voice firm. "We won't achieve anything by staying here." We broke camp and set out. David was visibly lagging behind, his eyes blank. He was in shock. I took turns with Lena, the two of us making sure that he kept moving and trying to take his mind off the situation with conversation, while Lena was in the back of our group with him. I went next to Jake. "David's falling apart, man," I whispered to him. "I don't know how long he'll hold it together, or what we'll do if he collapses." Jake looked at me. I could see the resolve in his eyes, so barely holding him together. In that brief moment, I truly admired his willpower. "It's 2 days to Hercules Inlet," he said. "If we just keep moving, we'll make it there. David will keep it together. He'll have to, and if he doesn't, we'll think of something. No one gets left behind. Jake turned and pressed onwards, our conversation clearly at an end. We pushed on. The loathsome stone circle had now abandoned all rules of logic and space. It moved seemingly randomly, always on the horizon but never shifting in a way consistent with our movement. I grew to hate the sight of it, somehow. I had no doubt it was connected to everything that had happened to our group. By the time we stopped to make camp, David had recovered somewhat. He was still distant and brooding, but I hoped he would be all right for the time being. We quickly agreed there was no point in standing guard over the camp, whatever had happened to Leif. It had happened while he was on watch, and he hadn't even managed to raise the alarm. We had a strange, naive sense of security while we stayed in our tents, like children hiding under their blankets at night. Even so, falling asleep was hard, the ever-present terror and foreboding. The fear of being taken next. It was hours until exhaustion finally put me to sleep. I dreamed that night. A horrible nightmare. Someone was opening the front of my tent. I lay in terror, holding my breath. The zipper went down. A grasping hand grabbed my legs and pulled me, kicking and screaming, into the snow outside. A dark, hooded figure stood above me. It reached down with gloved hands, going for my neck. I flailed wildly about, searching for a weapon. My hand tightened around a skiing stick. Lying in the snow, I lashed forward, driving it like a spear into the figure's throat. Blood spouted out. It gurgled horribly. I woke. I could immediately tell something had happened in the night. Lena was crying outside, low, heaving sobs. Jake was comforting her, silently, dejectedly. I climbed outside. David. Jake nodded grimly, gone from his tent. Footprints. Yes, where do they lead? Instead of answering, Jake pointed, gesturing behind me. I knew what I would see, but cursed loudly anyway when I saw the damned stone circle in the distance behind me. It was a lot closer than before. About a mile away. We should go check it, Jake said, although I could tell he didn't expect to find anything good. He may still be alive. We didn't break camp before setting out. I think there was a slight hope shared among us that if we hurried, we would find David, that he would somehow be alive. As we approached the circle, we could see something was lying on the central slab. I gestured to Jake and Lena to wait. Stay here, I'll check it out. They didn't argue. I walked into the circle cautiously and approached the central slab. I almost vomited when I saw what was on it. David, covered in blood. It was running away through the 4 grooves on it, a frozen trickle leading to the 4 corners of the stone on which he lay. His throat was speared through by a ski stick. My ski stick. I retched, gasping for air. I couldn't have done this. I had been sleeping. Had I? Was it a dream? Was I sleeping? I stumbled back to the others. Lena saw my expression, and her face fell. David, is he dead? I said hoarsely. I wish we had cried. I wish we had mourned our dead friend like people should. But no tears would come. No deep sorrow. Only an emptiness inside our souls. I think that we were all too numb, too shocked, to process the situation enough for an actual reaction. Some leftover survival instincts or self-preservation force kept us moving. We packed up our tents and left. It was some 4 hours into the journey when Jake stopped us. Guys, look, what is that? We turned, half expecting to see another stone circle. Instead, we saw a small, square building rising from the snow. It seemed uncannily out of place in the frozen expanse, like it had been dropped here by accident. Do you think we should go check it out? Whispered Lena. It's not a stone circle. That's gotta mean something, said Jake. We should have a look, at least. What do you think it could be? I asked. Jake shrugged. Science base. Maybe there might be people there. Maybe they can help us. Maybe they know what's happening out here. We set out towards the building. The closer we got, the clearer it became that it hadn't been used in a long while. Its cement walls were smoothed and half snowed under. Its iron door hung on the hinges, rusted and ajar. I guess Leif was right when he told us about the Germans, said Lena, pointing at the door. Impressed on it in fading paint was a large black swastika above the words AHNENERBE. I whistled under my breath. So what is this? Secret Nazi base? I thought they only had a small one on the coast, said Jake. Doesn't seem like it, I answered. Do you think we should go inside? We were quiet for a few seconds, weighing our options. Lena finally answered. Yes, maybe we can find some answers down there, or a weapon, or something helpful. The door swung open with a resounding creak, and we crept slowly inside, into the dark and the cold. The passage led downwards, seemingly cut into the ice itself. We found the first body in minutes. It had been preserved by the cold. A young man, dressed in a dark military uniform. He gripped a pistol in his hand, and a bullet wound marked the side of his head. Next to it lay a battery-powered light, which Jake picked up and tested. Somehow, It still worked, casting a slim, flickering ray of sickly yellow light through the tunnel. More bodies, lying everywhere, all of them gripping guns, with bullet wounds through their heads. I shivered. What the fuck happened here? Jake swallowed audibly. I don't know. Looks like some sort of mass suicide. We continued down the passage. Doors led off to the sides from it, opening up onto rooms filled with antiquated machinery and workstations. There were also several libraries. Much to our surprise, at the end of the corridor was a large iron door, much heavier than the others. We stopped in front of it for a second, apprehensive and fearful. Lena broke our reverie. "Oh, to hell with it," she said, leaning forward and pulling on the door. It budged open with a loud screech. Jake shone the light into the room beyond. We squinted into the dark, looking upon a massive chamber, tens of meters wide and deep. My heart dropped when I saw what it contained. Is that what I think it is?" asked Jake hoarsely. I nodded grimly. Before us, dominating the center of the room, lay a massive circle of gray stones.